At this time, I wanted to pick up where my friend Mr. Franks left off and follow up on the issue of who will be the next CIA director. This is an important matter. And some think, well, you know, what difference does the past make? Today is a new day. Every day is a new day. But those of us who majored in history, studied history, know that our history is the best indication of future performance. So with regard to Mr. Brennan, I think it's worth noting that Secretary of State, former Secretary of State now, Hillary Clinton, warned on her way out as Secretary of State of the danger of what she called the global jihadist threat. And I am greatly appreciative to Secretary Clinton for calling this administration's attention to that, as well as the American public. Secretary Clinton should know. We had at least 4 Americans killed at Benghazi during her watch as Secretary of State. The question might be, where is John Brennan today on this central challenge of our time for Western civilization? And by Western civilization, I mean the idea that the founders of this nation had, many of them depicted in the great mural just outside this floor, 56 signers of the Declaration in the mural that John Trumbull did down in the rotunda. Their idea, when you read their writings, was of a people who would have the chance to govern themselves. They all knew that prayer was important. That's why during, as Ben Franklin said during the Constitutional Convention, his own handwriting, he wrote out his speech, but he mentioned that during the Revolution, in his words, we had daily prayer in this room. Our prayers, sir, were heard and they were graciously answered. They understood that. They prayed for wisdom. They prayed for guidance. They prayed for help in setting up this experiment in democracy. Yes, Rome had had a Senate. Yes, Greece had had a Senate. England had had a parliament. But they had rulers who could just disband, kill, dismiss. This was going to be different. This was going to be a people who would have the chance to actually govern themselves. A revolutionary idea. There was still such a class system in so many areas of the world in the 1700s that so many considered that people who were not of the upper crust would not have the ability to govern themselves. That's not what the founders believed after they prayed each day during the Revolution, after they prayed and struggled and argued over the way forward to reaching that goal. But there is a threat, as Secretary Clinton said, of the global jihadist, of people who think that the founders' dream is totally inappropriate, that it leads to degradation, it leads to moral depravity in their minds. The founders knew that was a possibility, but it was worth the risk to give people the freedom of choice, as they believed their Creator had given all of us to make decisions for good or bad, and normally to have to live with the consequences of those decisions. The global jihadist threat that Secretary Clinton pointed out does not have the belief that a democracy is a good idea, that a people electing representatives in a Republican, little r, Republican form of government is a good idea. They believe that we need some religious leader like the Ayatollah Khomeini, or now Khomeini in Iran. We need a religious leader like that that tells us what we can do, that makes all his decisions under Sharia law. Now, all of those who met during the revolution, they believed in the power of prayer to God, and that's why they prayed during that time. But they wanted everyone to have the chance to worship as they chose, be they Muslim, Hindu, but especially Judeo-Christian beliefs, where Jews and Christians had traditionally suffered so much persecution. They wanted the chance for people to worship as they please or not worship, but they knew to make that possible they had to pray to God. And that's why we are observing once again tomorrow National Prayer Breakfast, where our President will speak, where we will have a fantastic testimony from one of the great leaders in our country who earlier in his life, when his life was going astray, dropped to his knees and prayed for help and got it. We will hear about that tomorrow. But if we don't know the history of this country, if we don't know the dream of the founders, if we don't understand the Constitution, then we lose it. And people need to understand when there is a global jihadist threat, not of moderate Muslims like our friends, the Northern Alliance, who fought and defeated the Taliban on our behalf, not the enemy of our enemies, but these are radical Islamic jihadists who want a caliphate in which the United States is subjugated to a religious ruler, and they're willing to use violence if necessary, although the Muslim Brotherhood now seems to indicate that here in America they've made so much progress in infiltrating and getting positions of power in our government, in our State Department, in our Homeland Security Department, in our Justice Department, at the White House directly, and direct lines to the President. They have made so much progress in moving toward that goal of a caliphate here in the United States under Sharia law, not under the Constitution, that they're thinking maybe violence is not the way forward in America to achieve their goal of making this a Sharia-compliant caliphate. But the Muslim Brotherhood around the world believes many places violence is the way forward in those areas. But we've got to understand who we are facing and what they want to do. And Secretary Clinton, unfortunately, it's on her way out that she notes this, instead of being able to spend the last 4 years with the clarity she had when she said that we face this danger of a global jihadist threat. It is a threat. She now acknowledges it on her way out. And the question now is, since Secretary of State Kerry will now be carrying that mantle, for heaven's sake, we have got to have someone in intelligence, directing intelligence, who understands the threat against us and will ensure that we are protected and understands the global jihadist threat. The Obama administration has focused almost entirely on Al-Qaeda, believing people when they came in and said, look, the only people who can actually give you advice on dealing with these radical folks are Islamic believers, so you must get advice from us. Form partnerships with us. Let us give you advice. Let us tell you how to deal with this threat. And they've made great inroads with this administration in that approach. But the blindness of the larger jihadist threat, the enterprise that is being pursued by the Muslim Brotherhood abroad, has resulted in the practice of drone-delivered assassinations of Al-Qaeda figures with what many are questioning or arguing is due process without that. And this administration's repeated declaration that al-Qaeda is being defeated. They know not of what they speak. The idea that al-Qaeda is being defeated is helping recruit others who are radical jihadists because they're able to point to a United States administration that is so blind and so uninformed of what really is going on that they think al-Qaeda is on the decline when radical jihad is on its way up. The drone technique of killing American citizens and killing radical jihadists is apparently thought by this administration to be a very advanced and practical approach. Well, it does avoid putting Americans at risk right now. But those same people in this administration that talked about the danger of waterboarding because, yes, some acknowledge we got very critical information by using that, even though there was no threat to their health, you had doctors there, there was no intention to do any harm. The intent was to perform a procedure that did not harm but would gather information. Well, this administration ran against John McCain saying, and even though John McCain agreed, yeah, we don't want to waterboard, we don't want to do anything that somebody might someday call torture, they complained, gee, this is allowing radicals to be recruited against the United States because of the unjust nature of doing a procedure that's not harmful to someone's health to gather information to save American lives, which it did. So here we are now with this administration that thought waterboarding helped jihadists recruit more radicals using a process of having a high administration official think to himself or herself, I think this may be enough. Yeah, blow them up. Without giving adequate consideration to civilians who will be killed, to family members who will be upset, to the ability of our enemies to use that to recruit other radicals many times over to replace those that have been killed with a drone strike. This administration's systemic failure to understand what the Muslim Brotherhood calls, quote, civilization jihad, unquote, is putting this country in severe jeopardy. That's why I appreciate Secretary Clinton, on her way out, unfortunately, pointing back to the danger of this global jihadist threat. According to and this is the name of the explanatory memorandum on the general strategic goal of the group, unquote, the mission of the Muslim Brotherhood is this, quote, a civilization jihadist process, a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within, sabotaging its miserable house with their, i.e., Americans, hands and the hands of the believers so that it is eliminated and Allah's region is made victorious over all other religions, unquote. The mission statement that I've just quoted translates into a comprehensive effort to penetrate, to influence, otherwise subvert our American civil society, our form of government, our governing institutions. That explanatory memorandum I just quoted from was written on May 19, 1991, by a top Muslim Brotherhood operative, Mohammed Akram. Now, though the Justice Department has established in federal court during the Holy Land Foundation trials in Dallas, Texas, that the groups identified by the Muslim Brotherhood in their memo are that, quote, their organizations, unquote, a number of them and their successors have been treated by the Obama administration as key interlocutors in dealing with radical jihad, and believes, in this administration, they believe that these Muslim Brotherhood front organizations are legitimate representatives of the Muslim American community. They have enabled the Muslim Brotherhood to recruit and to show others, look, we're the ones that the White House trusts. We can call the White House. We can call and tell them there are 3 people who are giving a seminar at Langley, CIA headquarters, to law officers, hundreds of them, and we believe they will be teaching them things that are offensive to us. Well, yeah, because they call them what they are. They read from their own documents. And these individuals who have spent their careers learning and teaching about the threat of what Secretary Clinton called the global jihadist threat were stopped in August, a year and a half ago, by a call to the White House. That call also was instrumental in prompting this administration, through the Intelligence Department, the Justice Department, all these departments, the FBI, into purging documents, purging words, purging things from our materials that someone who wants to destroy our way of life and take us over and make us a caliphate may be offended by. Go in to what has been purged because they decided to declare it a classified setting when Michelle Bachmann and I, and for a while lived in Westmoreland, went through documents to see what had been purged. Documents that we knew before we went in had supposedly been purged because someone who wants to destroy our way of life might be offended. Well, I am offended. Every American should be offended. Every Muslim should be offended that a governing administration would put the feelings of people who want to destroy us ahead of their oath to protect this nation and preserve the Constitution. It doesn't mean anything to preserve the Constitution if you preserve the document, but you do not preserve the enumerated powers and laws set out in that document. Now, last June, 4 of my colleagues and I wrote 5 different departments in this administration. And in those, each separate letter, each was different, we wrote to the Inspector General of each department. And we pointed out in each letter specific facts about that department that should give rise to an investigation as to the influence of people who have embraced the idea of civilization jihad and taking this country over and subjugating us to Sharia law and a religious leader who could tell us how to avoid moral depravity. There was such an uproar, even by some Republicans, by a few of them anyway, but some in the media went ballistic. And instead of doing their own investigation, they start blaming the messenger. But I don't hear any of those people attacking Secretary Clinton on her way out for saying, by the way, there is a global jihadist threat. It's what we've been trying to tell people for a couple of years at least. There is a global jihadist threat. Thank you, Secretary Clinton. You're right. Now for this administration to bring people in to top positions who do not understand the threat to this country and think that ignoring due process of our Constitution and killing American citizens with drone bombs is somehow preserving the Constitution. It requires another look. It requires oversight. There may be circumstances where that's what needs to be done. But I do find it interesting that this administration and certain leaders here on the Hill had no problem with Al-Awlaki leading prayers here at the Capitol, here on Capitol Hill, prayers by Al-Awlaki that were videotaped, that you can still find. He led prayers on Capitol Hill, and then he goes to Yemen, and this administration thinks we better kill him with a drone without due process. What were they afraid of? Maybe he'd come back and lead prayers on Capitol Hill? Or maybe he would be captured and talk to all he led prayers with on Capitol Hill? What was the need for taking this man out? We're told he had blood on his hands, and so it does seem. But there seems to be a problem when leaders of this country will say you cannot waterboard to get information, even though it's not a threat to the health of the individual. Scares them. But we will take an American citizen out who, not so long before, was leading prayers of Muslim staff members here at this Capitol, on Capitol Hill. It would be a grave mistake for our Senate to confirm John Brennan as the chief architect that he has been for the failure to understand and comprehend the global jihadist threat that Secretary Clinton has noted going out. There is an article today about dated February 6th, Jim Garrity, and I'm quoting from the article. Let me throw you a curveball by quoting Adam Serwer of Mother Jones reacting to the administration's release of its legal justification to kill Americans believed to be involved with terror without a trial by drone. And let me parenthetically note here, I'm not someone who comes to the table without an understanding about trials, about evidence, about due process, about constitutional rights, and about a death sentence. I've signed death sentences. It's a heavy, weighty matter. And as someone who has believed in capital punishment in the right circumstances, it's still a challenging moment when you watch your hand sign an order to have someone put to death. Done it twice. And in both cases, the evidence was overwhelming beyond a reasonable doubt. And the evidence was also overwhelming beyond a reasonable doubt that those two individuals were murdered an individual or more, knew what they were doing when they murdered one or more individuals, were complicit and actually either murdered or participated in the murder, and that there was no evidence. The question put to the jury, is there any evidence that mitigates against the imposition of the death penalty, as the Supreme Court has found? Any evidence. It's a no evidence question. Is there any evidence that mitigates against the death penalty? That's one of the three questions, and that's the standard. And that's what juries in states that allow capital punishment have had to wrestle with. I'd like to know who is considering those weighty issues in this administration. So we go back to Garrity's article. He quotes from Mother Jones. The Obama administration claims that the secret judgment of a single, quote, well-informed, high-level administration official, unquote, meets the demands of due process and is sufficient justification to kill an American citizen suspected of working with terrorists. That procedure is entirely secret. Thus, it's impossible to know which rules the administration has established to protect due process and to determine how closely those rules are followed. The government needs the approval of a judge to detain a suspected terrorist. To kill one, however, it need only give itself permission. Of course, the hypocrisy of most liberals doesn't get us off the hook on the need to have a coherent view on this, says Mr. Garrity. Okay, conservatives, big question now. If this were President Romney, would we be shrugging, concerned, complaining, or screaming? I think concerned. At the very least, you would want another set of eyes, the House or Senate Intelligence Committees, or some independent judges taking a look at the presidential kill list, right? At least for the American citizens. Our Charles C.W. Cook said, quote, in case my position isn't obvious, I am appalled by any president processing the unilateral power to kill American citizens extrajudicially, unquote. Senator Rod Wyden, Oregon Democrat, puts it rather, quote, every American has the right to know when their government believes that it is allowed to kill them, unquote. Garrity finishes his article by saying that doesn't seem like too much to ask. The article in Mother Jones is worth considering. It's dated Tuesday, February 5th, posted at 8:53 a.m. Pacific Standard Time by Adam Serwer. It takes a good look at this issue. So, what is the result of this administration's deciding secretly? Some bureaucrat decides, yeah, we got enough, we'll kill this man. Yeah, we got enough, we'll kill this person, this American citizen. Well, how is that working out? Well, there's an article published January 31st, 2013 by Catherine Herridge. Catherine has a great book out on radical Islam. This article, Catherine has entitled, Al-Qaeda Affiliate in Africa Looking to Strike More Western Targets, Intelligence Officials Say. She says in her article, quoting Secretary Clinton, quote, yes, we now face a spreading jihadist threat. We have driven a lot of the al-Qaeda operatives out of Afghanistan, Pakistan, killed a lot of them, including, of course, bin Laden. But we have to recognize this is a global movement. It's not, that's her quote, my comment, it's not a movement that is simply attacking overseas in some foreign country. Anyway, good article by Catherine Herridge. She understands the threat. But let me read a quote directly from White House counterterrorism advisor and nominee for director of the CIA, Mr. John Brennan. He said, quote, Hezbollah started out as purely a terrorist organization back in the early 80s and has evolved significantly over time. And now it has members of parliament in the cabinet. There are lawyers, doctors, others who are part of the Hezbollah organization. And so, quite frankly, I'm pleased to see that a lot of Hezbollah individuals are, in fact, renouncing that type of terrorism and violence and are trying to participate in the political process in Lebanon in a very legitimate fashion. They have not sworn off violence in Lebanon. They have not sworn off violence in Egypt, in Syria, as we well know, in Libya, Albania, Tunisia, even in African nations further south. I've said before, expressed my concern that this administration, by helping people we didn't know for sure their identity, helping them, encouraging them to overthrow this nation's ally, President Mubarak, expressed concerns before it was done about giving military assistance to people that we knew included al-Qaeda to overthrow a man who had blood on his hands, but since 2003 had been this nation's and this administration's ally, Gaddafi. And they participated in taking him out, gave military aid to do so, to protect the al-Qaeda and other revolutionaries, in setting up a government, a situation that naturally was going to get Americans killed, and which happened. So I applaud Secretary Clinton for noting the global jihadist threat on her way out. But I come back to her question that will ring in people's ears for years to come. When senators are trying to get to the heart of the matter, what happened at Benghazi? Please just tell us what happened. We're not going to prosecute anybody here at the Senate. We just need to know what happened. Her question, those words will ring, what difference does it make? What difference does it make? Americans got killed. I was inquiring, does anybody know, was a fifth person, have they died of their wounds at Benghazi? What's going on? What's happening to those people who were wounded? Who can tell us what really happened? What difference does it make so we can avoid Americans being killed like that in the future? If we had had an adequate investigation about security at our embassy back when Susan Rice was involved back in the 90s, did they ask for extra security? Did you deny them that security? Did we have enough security? What happened to allow our embassy to be bombed and Americans to be killed? What difference does it make? Because if we had known in the 90s what went wrong, maybe we could have avoided Chris Stevens, our SEALs, those 4 Americans that we know of being killed. What difference does it make? It makes a difference to their families if they're alive today or they're dead because we were not properly secured. What difference does it make? It makes a difference to future families who lose loved ones in the service of their country because people stonewalled and would not give us the information as to what went wrong, what happened. Just tell us. We're supposed to trust the administration, not only with a bureaucratic decision by one person that he thinks he's got enough information to go kill an American citizen without a trial. Now we have to say, oh, well, we will trust them to make sure nobody gets killed again, but it's already happened. And then by the stonewalling, we don't know enough about where the weapons came from. We don't know enough about what went wrong to know how those weapons that we may have provided in a country where we provided the revolutionary help now has resulted in Americans and others being killed in Algeria. What difference does it make? I'm sure the people who died in Algeria would like to have their family members back. That makes a difference. What difference does it make? It doesn't make any difference if you don't care who lives or dies. But if you want to protect Americans in the service of their country, it makes a real difference. And it's our duty to try to protect them. The New York Times has an article by Gregory Johnson back in November entitled "The Wrong Man for the CIA." He said, with the resignation of David H. Petraeus, President Obama now has a chance to appoint a new CIA director. Unfortunately, one of the leading candidates for the job is John Brennan, who is largely responsible for America's current flawed counterterrorism strategy, which relies too heavily on drone strikes that frequently kill civilians and provide al-Qaeda with countless new recruits. Rather than keeping us safe, this strategy is putting the United States at greater risk. For all of the Obama administration's foreign policy successes, from ending the war in Iraq to killing Osama bin Laden, the most enduring policy legacy of the past 4 years may well turn out to be an approach to counterterrorism that American officials call the Yemen model, a mixture of drone strikes and special forces raids targeting al-Qaeda leaders. Mr. Brennan is the President's chief counterterrorism advisor and the architect of this model. In a recent speech, he claimed that there was, quote, little evidence that these actions are generating widespread anti-American sentiment or recruits for AQAP, unquote, referring to al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. Perhaps the initials ought to be, instead of AQAP, this is me talking, not the article, instead of the initials, the acronyms that administrations, government likes to use, instead of AQAP, maybe it ought to be MBCH, the Muslim Brotherhood on Capitol Hill, where al-Awlaki, that this administration killed with a drone strike, led prayers. Back to the article, Mr. Brennan's assertion was either shockingly naive or deliberately misleading. Testimonies from Qaeda fighters and interviews I and local journalists have conducted across Yemen attest to the centrality of civilian casualties in explaining al-Qaeda's rapid growth there. Rapid growth there needs to be noted. People that have actually done an objective analysis have found al-Qaeda is not diminished. Radicals are growing to the point that Secretary Clinton would note the jihadist threat as she leaves. And the article says the United States is killing women, children, and members of key tribes. Quote, each time they kill a tribesman, they create more fighters for al-Qaeda, unquote. One Yemeni explained to me over tea in Sana'a, the capital, last month. Another told CNN after a failed strike, quote, "I would not be surprised if 100 tribesmen joined al-Qaeda as a result of the latest drone mistake," unquote. Rather than promote the author of a failing strategy, we need a CIA director who will halt the agency's creeping militarization and restore it to what it does best, or I would say what it did best at one time, collecting intelligence. It's an intelligence agency, not a lightweight version of Joint Special Operations Command. And until America wins the intelligence war, missiles will continue to hit the wrong targets, kill too many civilians, and drive young men into the waiting arms of our enemies. Without accurate on-the-ground intelligence, our policies will fail. George W. Bush launched 2 major ground invasions, and Mr. Obama has tried several smaller wars. Neither strategy has worked. In Yemen, which has been the laboratory for Mr. Obama's shadow wars, AQAP has more than tripled in size after 3 years of drone strikes. When the United States started bombing Yemen in 2009, AQAP had just 200 to 300 fighters. Today, the State Department estimates it has a few thousand. Since 2009, the group has attempted to attack America on 3 occasions, coming closest on December 25, 2009, when a would-be suicide bomber narrowly failed to bring down an airliner over Detroit. When it tries again, and it will, the organization will be available to draw on much deeper ranks. Not surprisingly, American officials reject the claim that current policy is exacerbating the problem. In June 2011, Mr. Brennan declared that, quote, "There hasn't been a single collateral death because of the exceptional proficiency, precision of the capabilities we've been able to develop," unquote. This came almost exactly a year after a botched drone attack in Yemen killed a deputy governor and 4 of his bodyguards instead of the intended target. Under Mr. Brennan's guidance, the United States has also adopted a controversial method for determining how many civilians it has killed, counting all military-age males in a strike zone as combatants. This means that Al-Awlaki, a 16-year-old American citizen killed by a drone in October, was classified as a militant despite evidence that he was simply a shy teenager whose father happened to be Anwar al-Awlaki, who had been killed by American missiles 2 weeks earlier. The strikes Mr. Brennan asked the President to approve frequently lead to civilian casualties. Indeed, the first strike Mr. Obama ordered on Yemen, December 2009, destroyed a Bedouin village that was mistaken for a terrorist training camp. American missiles killed more than 50 people, including 35 women and children. Watching the strike live on a grainy feed the military calls Kill TV, Jay Johnson, the Pentagon's top lawyer, later admitted, quote, "If I were Catholic, I'd have to go to confession," unquote. Mr. Petraeus' departure presents Mr. Obama with an opportunity to halt the CIA's drift toward becoming a paramilitary organization and put it back on course. For all the technological advances America's made in a decade of fighting al-Qaeda, it still needs all the old tricks it learned in the days before spy satellites and drones. More and better human intelligence from sources on the ground would result in more accurate targeting and fewer civilian casualties. That would be a Yemen model that actually worked and a lasting and more effective counterterrorism legacy for Mr. Obama's second term. Gregory Johnson from the New York Times. Another good article by Patrick Poole on June 6th of 2012. Meet John Brennan, Obama's assassination czar. A relatively unnoticed article, this is from the article quoting, by Associated reporter Kimberly Dozier 2 weeks ago outlined new Obama administration policy changes which consolidated power for authorizing drone attacks and assassinations under political appointees within the White House. The article identifies White House counterterrorism chief John Brennan as the official assuming the role of Obama's de facto assassination czar. raising concerns even within the Obama administration that the White House is increasingly turning into a, quote, pseudo-military headquarters, unquote, under the direction of just a few senior Obama administration officials. Adding to these concerns are serious questions about Brennan's qualification for this role. Even before the 2008 election, eyebrows were raised over Brennan's role in the Obama campaign. An employee of the Analysis Corporation, of which Brennan was CEO, had improperly accessed passport information for Hillary Clinton, Obama's Democratic primary challenger at the time, and GOP nominee John McCain. At the time, Brennan was a top advisor to the Obama campaign, and Brennan's employee was not fired. One of the key witnesses in the case was found murdered in his car outside his church while the investigation was still ongoing. Brennan was involved in administration intrigue related to the release of convicted Libyan Pan Am Flight 103 bomber from a Scottish jail in August 2009. At the time of Megrahi's release, when he returned to Libya to a national hero's welcome, Brennan described the release as, quote, unfortunate, inappropriate, and wrong, unquote, and called for his re-imprisonment. However, administration documents obtained by the Sunday Times revealed that the White House had secretly informed Scottish authorities that they found compassionate release more palatable than the re-imprisonment of Megrahi in Libya. Brennan also came under fire after would-be underwear bomber Umar Farouk, and I won't try that last name, nearly brought down a U.S.-bound Northwest Airlines flight on Christmas Day 2009. British intelligence authorities had notified their U.S. counterparts of an, quote, Umar Farouk, unquote, meeting with al-Qaeda cleric Anwar al-Awlaki in Yemen. And Umar Farouk's father had warned of his son's increasing extremism to CIA officials at the U.S. Embassy in Nigeria. However, Umar Farouk was never added to the U.S. no-fly list, nor was his U.S. visa revoked. And but for, as I understand it, him sweating too much around his posterior that helped defuse the bomb, and then the work of some heroic passengers to stop him once he tried, the passengers were saved. But it was certainly no thanks to the Obama administration or Mr. Brennan. Now back to the article. Patrick Poole says, following this stunning and nearly fatal intelligence failure, which prompted members of both the House and Senate Intelligence Oversight Committees to call for his resignation, Brennan lashed out at the Obama administration's critics in a USA Today editorial. He claimed that the, quote, politically motivated criticism and unfounded fear-mongering only serve the goals of al-Qaeda, unquote. Let me insert here, if he thinks, Mr. Brennan thinks, that questioning failures of the Obama administration is contributing to al-Qaeda, what must bombing innocent people with drones be doing for al-Qaeda? Back to the article, says Brennan also defended treating Umar Farouk as a criminal by having his rights read to him upon arrest and trying him in civilian court rather than transferring the would-be bomber to military custody as an enemy combatant. Just days later, Brennan gave a speech to Islamic law students in New York University where he was introduced by Ingrid Mattson, president of the Islamic Society of North America at that time. Mattson, who had been involved with the Obama inaugural prayer service, had come under fire then for organization's long-standing terrorist support. During his New York University speech, Brennan defended the administration's highly unpopular move to try al-Qaeda operations chief Khalid Sheikh Mohammed in federal court, which the administration eventually backed away from. He claimed that terrorists are the real victims of political, economic, and social forces. Mr. Speaker, it's important people understand John Brennan claimed that the terrorists killing Americans, over 3,000 on 9/11, were the real victims of a political, economic, and social force. Brennan said Islamic terrorists are not jihadists, referenced Al-Quds instead of Jerusalem, and described the 20% of former Guantanamo detainees returning to terrorist activities as not that bad when compared to ordinary criminal recidivism. The thousands of people that have likely been killed by the 20% of our detainees being returned to terrorist activities probably would not consider Mr. Brennan's assessment as not that bad. They wouldn't consider that all that accurate. Patrick writes a great article. He has another one, January 7, 2013, entitled Revisiting Jihad, John Brennan. Another by my friend Andrew McCarthy on February 4th, opposed Brennan for CIA director. And I'd ask unanimous consent to include these articles in the record.
Without objection.
It is time we took a real objective look at people who say their goal is civilization's jihad and the elimination of our freedom to choose as we please and to choose our public servants. And, Mr. Speaker, with that, I'll yield back.
Gentlemen.